Welcome to RiekersArt.com. Today I'm going to talk about perspective and how that applies to bonsai and bonsai drawing. Perspective is the representation on a flat surface what we see from the point of view of our eye. So let me try to represent that in drawing form. Okay, so let me draw an eye for you. So here's an eye. So there's your common eye, right, with your pupil in the middle. And when we're looking straight, we're looking along a straight line like this. And what we have with our eye is we actually have a field of view. So that field of view comes off of the eye like that. So this whole thing is our field of view. Okay, so if something is far away from us, let's just do a stick figure here. It actually doesn't occupy that much of our field of view. So that field of view is actually quite small relative to the overall field of view. So if that was a flat piece of paper, it would occupy, here's the whole piece of paper view, it only occupy a little part of that view. If say it's same size object, but it's closer, we see right away that it actually increases in our field of view. So it's occupying a lot more of our field of view. This was occupying this much of our field of view, this from here to here. Now this is occupying that much of our field of view. And as this object actually gets closer, same object, it now occupies the majority of our field of view. So again, this is the field of view. This would be what we would be seeing here, and it's occupying a lot of our field of view as this object comes closer. So that brings us to this idea of linear perspective, and that is how an object looks smaller as it goes away from us. Again, let me represent that in a drawing. So again, let's take a look at this idea that how an object looks smaller as it goes away from us. So I have a horizon line. The horizon line is actually what, if I was at the ocean and I was looking straight, you would see the end of the ocean or the top of the ocean right along that horizon line. If I look down, that horizon line comes up. If I look up, the horizon line comes down. But if I'm just looking straight, and so for purposes of this drawing, I'm just looking straight, the horizon line is right along my straight field of view. So here I have a horizon line here. I'll just call it HL. And then I have my person. So here's my person. And this is the size that person looks like in the idea of how close the person is to me. So as a person goes away, the person starts to get smaller in my field of view, just like we talked about here, how it's shrinking in my field of view. As it goes further away, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Whoops. That's where its legs should be. So what happens is that we end up, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it actually becomes a point. And so that point right there is what we would call one-point perspective. It's basically where this object vanishes as it goes away from me further and further in distance, say on a road or a street or whatever. So we're going to call this I'm just going to use VP, but we're going to call this a vanishing point. And from this perspective, we are looking at 1 point perspective. There's just 1 point. So let's continue with this idea of 1 point perspective. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a bonsai pot for this representation. Okay, let's assume right now that I'm just looking square at the bonsai pot. I don't see the right side, I don't see the left side, I don't see the top or bottom, I only see the front. And I'm looking square. That would be, from a camera's point of view, look like that. And I'm looking level. I'm not looking up, I'm not looking down, just straight onto it. So let's go back to this idea of my horizon line. Here's my horizon line. And now, here's my pot. So I'm just looking square at the pot. I'm not looking at, I don't see any of the sides, just the front. Now, let's take this pot and let's lower it. Now when I lower it, now I see the top of the pot and I see the front of the pot. I don't see the other sides, but I see the top and the front. So what is that really? Well, it's the same as far as the size in the front, but I know the size, I know that this is further away from me, so it's got to be smaller in representation. We showed that in the first part of this video. Okay, so here what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back this idea of a vanishing point. Here's my vanishing point. Here's my horizon line. Okay, so I just take that and I draw from that vanishing point to the corners of my pot, and then voila, I now have the top of my pot. And now it's a clear representation of space, of as that's going further in the distance. I could do the same, having this idea where now I'm going to take it and I'm going to raise it. Now I'm going to see the bottom of the pot and the front of the pot. I don't see the sides, but I see these two surfaces. So I'm going to raise the pot. Here's the pot up here. And I come off of these vanishing points, and voila, I now have the perspective. And this is the representation of 1 point perspective. Well, of course it can't be that simple, so let's make a slight complication to it. And what now I'm going to do is I have the pot, I'm looking on square, but I'm going to turn it 45 degrees. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to see the right side and the front. From the perspective of the camera, it would be doing that. So now I'm seeing this side and I'm seeing that side. But there's an interesting phenomena that happens when I do that. That is, this side is closest to me, this side is further away, and that side is further away. So how do we deal with that? Well, what happens is that, just like we did, I'm going to turn, no, we'll keep it like this. Here's my horizon line, but here's my pot where I'm seeing the front corner of the pot. That's this corner of the pot. But because when I turn it, this is further away, there has to be a vanishing point over here. At the same time, there has to be a vanishing point over here for the other side. So what happens is a line draws up to this point, a line draws to that point, and a line draws to this point, and a line draws to that point. And what happens is, boom, there's my object. And this is called 2-point perspective. So I have 2 points. This side is going off into a distance. That side is going off in the distance. Of course, I kept this at eye level, so it's all bifurcated by the horizon line. Okay, so let's do the steps that we did with the 1-point perspective, but we're doing it with 2-point perspective. So here's my pot. I've turned it 45 degrees. Now I'm going to drop it down. Now I actually see 3 surfaces. I see the right side, the left side, and the top. Okay? This is going to be very important later on in videos to understand how this all works and how that applies to your bonsai drawing or drawing in general. Okay, so now I'm going to drop it. So what happens is that this is further away, this is further away, and this is further away. That point there. Okay? So I drop it, the front remains the same, but because I have 2-point perspective, I'm going to draw a line and draw a line, continue this line down, that's my left side, or right side, and then I'm going to draw a line, and I'm going to draw a line. Of course, I'm doing this freehand, you know, you could use a ruler and make it much nicer. And now I have the 2 sides. So this is hitting a vanishing point, that's hitting a vanishing point, those are the 2 sides. But the interesting thing with 2-point perspective, because these are parallel surfaces, I know that this corner is going to go to that vanishing point. And this corner is going to go to this vanishing point. And now I have your classic idea of a box in space. You see that? So now I see the top. I see the side. And I see the other side. Let's do the same with the raising it up. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same. Just to bring home this idea, I'm looking square at it. If you were looking, you're here, then it went there. We went down and it stayed parallel to the ground, and we turned it like this. So this would be the camera view of that perspective. Now we're going to bring it up. So it's here, 45 to me. I'm going to bring it up. I see the bottom. Okay, so now I see 3 sides of the box. So here it is up here. That's the front. Vanishing point. For the left side, vanishing point. For the right side, there's the right side wall. Here's the left side wall. And then again, this bottom will go over to the vanishing point, and this will go to that vanishing point, and I have my pot in space now. There's my pot. So now I have my pot in space, 2-point perspective. There are a lot more complicated ways of dealing with this as well. You can move into other perspectives and in greater complexity. There's no need for us to do that when it comes to bonsai drawing. All we need is really how to represent our pot in space. But I'm going to talk about other things in regards to where this applies. So what I want to do now is talk a little bit about the tricks to the trade when it comes to using perspective to give you this sense of depth. And I'm going to use 1-point perspective. So in 1-point perspective, say here's my horizon line. I could come off to my vanishing point and I can draw the side of a building. So here's the side of a building. So here's the side of the building, and as I'm looking down the street, it projects into a 1-point perspective. If I take an angle here, so I got this angle, if I repeat that angle here, that gives me another line. And I repeat the exact same angle, it gives me another line. In the exact same angle, and I get another line again, and I repeat this as I get closer. And what happens, you see how this is closer and it's further away, and it gives you that idea of perspective. Eventually these things come together and they're clustered at the end here. So this is an interesting way of creating the idea of a buildings going off in the distance. Okay? Now I could do the same at the bottom here. So say I have a road that's coming out from here, or say it's bricks or whatever. I can draw a line here and then draw a line here. Now if I repeat this angle, it creates a line here. Create that angle, creates a line here. Create the same angle, creates a line here. Same angle, creates a line there. Same angle, creates a line here, so forth and so on. You can see how these are getting closer together? And pretty soon it's just a blur as it goes together. So, you know, like if I was creating a checkerboard ground, I'm getting this idea of receding and giving you this illusion of space, of going into a distance. So one of the interesting usage of perspective in bonsai has to do with forest plantings or Saikei. You want to give this illusion of depth, but you really don't have much depth with the pot. So you're going to use perspective to give you that illusion. Over here is one of my Saikeis that I put together just last year, actually. It's a liquid amber, and it's in winter, so it's lost all its leaves. So it's a really good time for me to work on it right now to shore up the structure of the forest itself. But let me represent that in As before, we're going to use a horizon line. And in this case, I'm going to use a 1-point perspective. So there's my perspective along my horizon line. That horizon line is the top of the pot, actually, when you're doing your planning. So it's the top of my pot. Here's my horizon line. So actually I'm going to take it, instead of being the center, which is quite boring, I'm going to move it off to the side. Put some asymmetry into the planning itself. Now, I have my vanishing point, so what I'm going to have is I'm going to have these lines coming out here like this, just like we had shown before. And so my biggest tree is going to be, actually my biggest tree is going to be over here. So here's my biggest tree at that end. And then my next biggest tree is going to be here. And so here's my first planting of my tree. And then I'm going to put another tree in here, a little smaller. And then I'm going to put another tree over here, same idea. So here's my big tree on this side, here's my smaller tree on that side. Now remember, I had just done this trick where you come at an angle. If I come at an angle and I put another tree a little bit closer, it's going to start giving you that illusion of depth. Same with this, there's that angle, so this comes a little bit closer. But, you know, nobody does that, nobody's this mechanical when they put it together, but you have that kind of in your mind when you're doing it. Plus, some of your trees grow fatter than others, and, you know, it sort of gets out of control, but that's the love of doing the bonsai itself, the randomness. But let's continue this idea. So I put another tree here, and another tree here. So I bundle these trees and I start bundling them as I get closer to my vanishing point. It's the same with here. I might finish just little tiny trees over on this side and leave this big gap in here so that when I'm actually planning it, I kind of have this idea of a path that's going in to this 1 point. This is the 1 point perspective type layout. So the 2 point perspective layout, I got the same thing. I have my horizon line with my pot, but this time I'm going to have my horizon line, my points coming out here. I'm going to do it asymmetrically. I'm going to put my biggest tree here. Again, a little bit asymmetric. You don't want to be so symmetric that it just becomes boring. My personal feelings is that the biggest sin in art is to make the art boring. And so what we want to do is we want to do anything to kind of offset it so it's not boring. All right, so again, I'm going to do this idea of a planting here. This angle, that angle, so another plant should go here. Again, like I said, you know, this is very random when it comes to putting together, as you can see that I have on this one, on the actual planting. But the idea is the same. So I have a gap here so that it's like a trails going through it. Again, I'll put another one here. But then as it goes to the closer outward, it's going to start bundling. So I have more plantings and smaller trees. And what you end up having is a little bit younger trees. Because this tree has the biggest girth in it. These trees have the smallest girth in it. As they go away, that obviously gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Same with here. This tree has the biggest girth in it. And you can put some trees over here so you can continue this idea of a vanishing point and put it, you know, a couple more over here if you wanted to. But this is the idea, and how interesting it is that that's applied in Japanese bonsai in regards to plantings. You'll also see that not only in Saikei, you'll see it in the Chinese penjing. They'll do the same idea of creating this exaggerated space that gives you this idea of depth when it comes to a bonsai forest planting. So this brings us to this idea of foreshortening. Foreshortening and perspective, they go hand in hand. And so foreshortening is this idea of something coming towards us and then getting smaller, going away from us. So if I have a stick and I'm going to draw that stick, or anything, so here's the front of that stick. As that stick goes away from me, it's going to that vanishing point. And so the stick is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so the real length of this stick may be this long, right? That's the real length of the stick. But because I'm drawing it in space, it is foreshortened. So right in here is a foreshortened segment of that stick. How does that apply to bonsai? Well, consider a redwood. A redwood's extremely tall, and it tapers and it becomes really, really fat. So if you've never seen a redwood in the redwood forests of California, it's really something remarkable. A person looking at this redwood would be, you know, very, very tiny. Here's my person right there looking at this redwood. What they're going to do is when they see the bottom of this redwood in their field of view, they're going to see this really big section. It's going to occupy a huge amount of their field of view. But as they start looking up, this thickness of this tree gets smaller and smaller. And as they look up to the top, it gets really thin. So not only is it actually tapering in nature, the visual response that you're getting from it is a foreshortened response. You're looking at the bottom and then you're looking at the top as though this is at an angle. So as you're looking up at these trees, your head almost goes straight up to look at the top of these trees. And this perspective just becomes incredible. It really makes these trees look like they're, you know, the tallest thing you've ever seen. This is the same way when it comes to buildings as well, but we're talking bonsai, so I'm going to focus on trees. Okay, so how do we represent that in bonsai? Well, we usually do that by having large bases and exaggerated taper in our trees. So I just invite you to go and look at some bonsai trees, go to some bonsai shows, or see it online, and you'll see these massive bases and that they'll taper into a very, very small top. The best of the best have no scars at all. It's extremely hard to get that. It takes years and years and years to get a perfectly tapered tree, but that is our idea. We want large bases, large nabari roots going into the pot, and then tapering up to a very small top and exaggerating that. And again, that comes from this idea of perspective and specifically foreshortening. So I'm going to try to apply these lessons of perspective on my Saikei right now. So as you can see, I put the largest tree in the front here, and I created this idea of depth by creating this space in here. Again, this is a brand new planting. It's just 1 year old. So what I do still need to do is I still need to take some of these and wire them up straight, not have them bent so much. So that gives an idea of age when I bring them up straight. If it's too wiggly, that might make it look a little bit young. So, but I do want this idea of a 2-point perspective, like I explained before. So I want it coming down, and I want it coming down like this. So I'm going to start, but I want the ones in the front to be the tallest, the ones in the back to be the smallest. Again, if I do that, that gives that other idea of receding in the back. Okay, so I'm going to pretty much leave this one alone right now. This is dead here, so I could take that off. But I'm pretty much going to leave that alone, except for this one that's coming at me. So I'm going to get rid of this one, because that's coming at me. This is a new growth. I don't need that new growth, so I'm going to get rid of it. And this is a dead part of it, so I could just break that off. So this gives me this idea of going down. But this is too high for the one that's in front. So I'm going to cut it here. By cutting it here, I'm actually creating taper or foreshortening, like we talked about in the previous section. Okay, so I do want foreshortening to happen. So I can cut this down here, that down there. I'm going in a downward fashion. This portion at the top actually died, so I'm just going to cut that off. This will grow back. Nothing's perfect when you come to do these things. You have to make these kind of intermediate choices. But later on this will grow. And what I really want is I want this one to grow a lot. I want these ones in the back to grow less. But I'm also going to project them out just to give fullness once this tree has all of its foliage. Okay, so some of these in the back is going to impede my looking back here. This one is fairly thick, which is what I don't want going in the back. These two are fairly thick. So I'm always cutting this one way back, cutting this what we would call hard. So I'm cutting this back hard. I don't need this going off there. And keeping this as small and as narrow as I possibly can, not letting that really grow. Okay, so this bifurcated down in here, but I kind of like the size in there. And it really isn't giving me any taper, so I'm going to cut it, that portion off. Okay, so now let's work with this one in the front here. You can see the one right behind it is too tall, so I'm going to bring this one down. And then the one next to it I'm going to bring down. Okay, so I want this heavy taper in here. Okay, so I do like the height of this though. And I like the idea that it's, you know, if this is very high, it's going to start really thickening this up. So this is turning out to be pretty nice. It's a little more extended in here than I like. You know, you kind of like to create some sort of triangular motion. So I'll get rid of some of these really leggy items here that I don't really need. And I think that's fine there. That gives me some idea of taper. The nice thing about these kind of trees, I didn't do it this year because this was a brand new planting, but next year I can do some defoliating. And then during the defoliation time, I can dial this in even more. Also, I'll probably put some wire on it, and during the defoliation time is the time I want to remove that wire so it doesn't bite in. Okay, but I do have this extending out in here, which isn't bad. I kind of like it, but I think it's fine. I think what I'm going to do is just get rid of that and get rid of that. And then this is way too tall. And I can get rid of this and actually wire this up, you see? So you don't always wire down when it comes to bonsai. Sometimes you actually wire up. Okay, so I think that's fine. That's a good example of how I would approach this and use this idea of taper to create my Saikei. Again, big thick in the front and the back. These are my fertilizer bags. Take that off, give you a better view. Kind of in here I created a granite base with some rocks to give it some age. And there you go. That's basically 1 year of planting. This tree is probably 4 years old. And some of these are like a year old. So there you go. So I hope you enjoyed this video on perspective. If so, please subscribe to my YouTube site, Ron Reekers, as well as you can follow me on Instagram under Ron Reekers and Facebook, and as well as I have a website, reekersart.com, where you can see the artwork that I've done that's related to bonsai and other types of artwork. Also, I have a Patreon site at Ron Reekers, and for as low as $3 a month, you can help support me in what I'm doing here. I'm really happy to share this with you. I hope it gets you some idea of how perspective is working when we do a drawing, and it'll help you in your bonsai drawing, your regular drawing, as well as your bonsai work. Okay, well, have a good day. We'll talk to you soon.